How many of you in your professional lives have ever gone through a merger or an acquisition? Just quickly raise your hand. Okay. For those of you that haven't raised your hand, you're probably still in school and haven't had the pleasure of experiencing it. Because the statistics show that on average, an adult who retires at age 65 will experience about 2.16 mergers and acquisitions in their professional career. So for those of you that have been through that, just yell out kind of an adjective that would describe your experience in a mergers and acquisition environment.
Anxious.
Chaos. Anxious.
Painful.
Painful.
Chaos.
Chaos.
Uncertainty.
Uncertainty. Good term. What else?
Never done till it's done.
And then it may not be done. I've heard terms like agonizing. I mean, I've rarely heard a positive term. And I think that's one of the unique aspects about mergers and acquisitions. But we want to understand tonight a little bit from a supply chain perspective what the impacts of a merger and acquisition would be on the whole supply chain management activity. You know, if you look over the last couple of years, 2006 through 2009, the pace of mergers and acquisitions has definitely gone down. Slower economy, companies are not investing, although there are a few companies out there that have plenty of cash or a good line of credit that have taken opportunistic advantage of acquiring companies kind of at rock bottom prices. But definitely, as the economy, if you believe what the administration is saying, that the recession ended a year ago, definitely whenever that is, as the economy starts trending back up again, I think we can definitely expect to see the pace of mergers and acquisitions starting to increase again. That's for sure. You know, you can look at what the key drivers for mergers and acquisitions are, and this will vary. It's probably one or more of the following items that's on this list. Companies may be looking to expand the products or the services that they offer. A lot of them are looking at synergies. We're going to use that word several times tonight. What kind of synergies can we realize as two companies going forward as opposed to two individual, or as one company going forward as opposed to two individual companies? A key driver of many mergers and acquisitions is getting access to foreign markets or foreign areas that the acquiring company never had access to. You see this quite heavily. Good example right in our own backyard, the partial acquisition of Chrysler by the Fiat Group. It's not because Fiat is investing heavily in Chrysler because they believe in their products necessarily. That's a part of it. But what did they buy? They bought immediate access to over 2,500 dealer-distributor access points that they could not have afforded to invest in themselves, and a distribution network that goes along with that. So again, a very key driver for a lot of M&A deals in the past. Market share growth, I mean, one way to increase your market share is to buy out your competitors, right? And again, I think that's been a driver in some cases. And then in many cases, it's to acquire key products, key technologies, or even key people. Key people that are recognized industry leaders will enhance the value of your company along the way as well. You know, there's a lot of different things that have to be managed in a merger and acquisition situation. Not all of them necessarily apply directly to supply chain. For instance, brand management. Again, I will refer a couple of times to my own background just because that's what I know best. But in 1998, when Daimler-Benz acquired Chrysler, all of a sudden you have a situation where you have a premium car brand, Mercedes-Benz. It's recognized over 100 years around the world as representing, what's their slogan? Nothing but the best, I believe it is, or something close to that. And the Chrysler brands, Dodge, Jeep, Chrysler, that in their eyes kind of represented the blue-collar type of vehicles. What do you do from a brand management standpoint? Do you try to merge those brands into one? You really run the risk of diluting the Mercedes brand, and not sure what you would have done to the Chrysler brand along the way. But again, that's not the path they chose. The path was really to try to leverage the combination of technologies and to do a lot of things that were more or less transparent to the end consumer. But again, you have to look at things like that. But in the supply chain space, these three items are typically part of any merger and acquisition activity. Number one is just the organizational alignment. What do you do with the people? What's the org structure going to look like for the new company going forward? You know, do you make any fundamental changes? Obviously, you have redundancy. You know, do you need 2 directors of marketing? Do you need an operations manager in both organizations? Secondly is IT technology. We're going to talk a little bit about the challenges that are inherent with taking the systems, the legacy systems of what had been 2 companies. Most often they're not the same. Most often. So how do you put them together so you have a common IT information technology platform that the new company can operate under? And then thirdly is the physical infrastructure. What do you do with buildings, manufacturing locations, transportation routes? What do you do with distribution centers? And again, how do you decide what you need to go forward as a single combined entity? So again, we're going to dive down a little bit into each of those topics and take a little closer look. Key statistic on this slide is that one recent survey estimates that about 75% of the challenge in joining 2 companies together centers around organizational alignment issues. How do you put the organization together going forward? And obviously, if you're in a company that's just been acquired, what's on your top of your mind? A job. A job, right? What's my future going to be? And that's a key concern that we'll talk about how that needs to be really addressed. But really, the success or failure of most M&A activities starts right here. If you can effectively figure out how to put the organizational aspect together for the new company going forward, again, that's a huge step in the right direction. In many cases, there's a need and often a strategy that's employed to keep parallel organizations in place. So if 2 companies are merging together, in some cases they keep the 2 organizations, or at least the essence of the 2 organizations, separate and continuing in operation for a period of time. That may be very necessary and even wise in the short term, just to make sure you don't disrupt anything in your respective businesses. But that's probably a fatal mistake some companies make by keeping that structure in place too long. Because you really will continue to operate as 2 separate companies. You really will start to sub-optimize the synergies and the benefits that you can see longer term as long as you maintain 2 parallel organizational structures. So again, where I've seen this most effectively managed is in situations where there's a transitional organization for a period of time, usually not longer than a year, depending on the size of the merger, and then they migrate toward a single organizational structure going forward. Retaining key people, very critical issue. And look at the statistics in the, what is that, purple box? 26% of the companies that have gone through a recent M&A activity have experienced separation rates of key individuals. This is not just general population. This is your rising superstars. These are the people that you want to build your company around. And why do they lose them? I think that the reasons up at the top are often the case. Very poor communication, especially targeted to those key individuals. You know, what's their concern? Not a job for sure, but future. How am I going to fit in this new organization? And in most cases where I've seen it successfully managed, you will over-communicate. You need to over-communicate, especially to your key individuals. Assure them, as much as you can honestly tell them. You don't want to give them false expectations, but on the other hand, maybe all you can say is, don't worry, you've got a future and a very important role to play in our new company. That's usually enough to give them the confidence. Insufficient attention to workforce issues. We'll talk about that here in a little bit more. But again, uncertainty is probably the key theme as to why individuals, key individuals, high potential individuals leave organizations, again, at a pretty frequent rate in the case of a merger and acquisition. This is an interesting one. Compensation and benefit structure. Obviously, two companies had their own compensation plans. They had their bonus plans for executives. They had whatever the pay rate is that they gave to their blue-collar workers and to their white-collar workers. And again, usually they're not the same. What do you do in a situation like that? Well, a lot depends on the situation. I mean, if you have a company that you've just acquired that's in a low-cost country market, you probably don't want to bring them up to par with your United States counterparts. That would be kind of like shooting yourself in the foot. But on the other hand, if they're in the same general market, same general business, they need to be more or less in line. I can't tell you how many situations we ran into in the Daimler and the Chrysler mergers where they were not in line, and they just became a constant source of irritation, constant source of controversy, and it just was very disruptive. So again, the HR organization needs to be very key in trying to figure out what the right strategy is going forward as far as wages and compensation.